Right, hello everybody, and welcome back. This is going to be a video which I've titled British Trauma Zone. And the reason I've titled this is I've been watching alongside, of course, friend of myself and Duke and channel, Horus has been on Academic Agents channel, and they've been going over the Adam Curtis series Trauma Zone, looking at the fall of the Soviet Union and the through from the perestroika policy and the um, in the regime of Boris Yeltsin, who brought in shock therapy, this sort of mass democracy, total capitalist society, and the abject misery that that created, particularly when it came to the effect of the people and the sort of collapse in a social order. And some of it, while look at it and you can see how extreme it got, it we're not in that total position, but I can see the level of despair that many people in Russia were feeling at the time through these series of interviews. I'm seeing that more and more now in our country, um, across all social groups, across all British people. There is that feeling of just total despair and no hope for anything, because things just are getting worse, and this is sort of amplified, the state of the country, through the murder of an 18-year-old lad named Henry Nowak in Southampton. This story has gone uh, effectively, national, then global. This resulted in, you know, uh, partly down to the likes of Elon Musk, but also political, you know, uh, I wouldn't say interference, but from outside, but also comments by Nigel Farage, um, some of which I would say is quite unusual for him. He had a really strong. He didn't do the whole. He actually went. He sort of did the Morrissey line and said, "Yeah, look back in anger," which he's been condemned for, and he's doubled down today. Um, you know, Restore and Rupert Lowe, they've opted not to really comment directly on it, but they sort of talked about the two-tier policing and the the sort of despondent white masses feeling that there is the that they are completely like detached and um, withdrawn from society as a form of government policy. And this all culminates really in uh, the style of policing, the legacy of the Macpherson report, which uh, came about from the death of Stephen Laurence, Saint Stephen Laurence. Anyone who's my age, so probably about 30, um, probably like 25 and above, or 30 and above, will remember and know this story. And it was something that was even at school was pushed down as a constant reminder. And effectively, the result of this, and I'll get into it in a bit, but it was how you police um, at that point minority communities. So how in metropolitan London, how they police blacks or Asians or um, you know gypsies or something like that. That was the and then effectively there was a two-tier system in the sense of they had different approaches to different people, which makes it a two-tier system. And what's incredible is you've got former borough commanders one borough commander I saw on LBC, but also cited by the BBC today, and countless journalists and politicians who have come out and said there is no two-tier system, while at the same time acknowledging the anti-racism training and policy introduced on the back of the McPherson report, which is two-tier. And what I've seen is many people not defending what the police officers did. I haven't seen anyone defend the police officers because I've heard excuses like it was a confused situation. This is from the body cam footage, by the way, which is incredibly graphic. But they're defending what was how they approached it, that it was a confused situation, and all that sort of stuff. But apart from that, they're finding it difficult. They're trying to, in a very illogical manner, draw upon you know examples of stop and search I've seen and all that, but what it comes down to is the and also trying to say, well, we can't bring race and identity into this case, which is what the likes of Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the Conservative Party, said on Good Morning Britain on ITV a few days ago now. But the problem is with that, and the problem that the Liberals and the sort of progressives have to confront on this case, is that the entire story from start to finish is entirely racial. The the murderer in question, he, or his brother, I should say, phoned up the emergency services. Now, bear in mind, didn't phone for an ambulance, phoned for the police, and informed that he and his brother had received a form of racist attack. And when they arrived there, and I'm not going to show the body cam footage here because you probably see it on Facebook or somewhere at this point. Vikram Singh Digwa, the murderer, and his brother both say that Henry Nowak, racially abused them, tried to grab his turban, and even Vikram, the murderer himself, said that tried to informed officers that he had like a mark on his around his eye socket to say that Nowak even tried to attack him. All of which was trying to distract. And at the same time, Vikram's mother, who's also been found guilty, at this point, took the ceremonial Sikh knife that was the weapon used for this murder and went and hid it. But because the police were called there, and they either following policy or well, you can come up with reasons. We'll go through the reasons. Their initial reaction was the scene was, you see a crowd of people and you see this one guy on the ground in visible distress, and the first thing that Digwer was, because he couldn't talk. Henry, he'd been stabbed, he couldn't talk, and without getting too graphic, he probably, well, there were punctures, he was stabbed in the heart. He probably just, he couldn't talk coherently. He managed to get out a few phrases, including the infamous one, "I can't breathe," which has been used as a rallying cry for the protesters and many people who have been absolutely outraged about this and have been, going to in-person demonstrations in Southampton, and vigils. I think I think it's one in Bristol as well a few days ago. So, and the immediate response from the police officers were to handcuff him. And no, I will say what happened as he was being handcuffed. and you've seen images. He because he was dying, he bled out. You see from his hand that it's as pale, as anything. And during that process, he died. He died, and you can see the point where he did. It's all because of the word. Now, the problem that the anger that people have with this is, even if it was diversity training, or even if there was elements of diversity training, it's quite self-evident that something about this scene isn't right. Why is he on the floor in visible distress? What's gone on here? He's surrounded by family. And the other thing, and I'm going to just read a bit from Millennial Woes here, who did an excellent, and do check it out, his Substack, on the accounts of what happened, and about the perpetrator and his background, because he has a history of troubling behaviour anyway, which was known about within his own community. But I think what shocks people is like the level of his own family trying to cover it up, and this sort of, and then the police officers trying to protect them. I mean, they're trying to protect themselves, uh, trying to play down the incident. Even as I speak now, they're talking about reflecting on procedure and all that, and investigation. The officers who were involved have still been able to work on frontline duties. And this is really the problem. This isn't like a fuck up at the office. It's not like they accidentally sent a ticket to the wrong person, a summons ticket to the wrong person, or uh, or something like that, or misidentified someone, and stopped them being the wrong person. Somebody died. And compare the reaction from the stabbings at Golders Green a few weeks ago to what's happened this week. Compare that, and that is the two-tier. That is what people are angry about, and this is going to be a perpetual thing. It isn't going to go away. And I do think, in some regards, this story is going to, it's not going to go away. I think it's going to linger. I think the anger is it's still going to be there. And I've noticed that the government has been slightly different with Southport, have been slightly different covering this. You haven't, like, for example, I was expecting yesterday that when the demo in Southampton was going, you had Tommy Robinson and his band turned up, and they made a complete arse of themselves while they were there, about Islam and all that sort of crap, and they got pushed back by some people there, rightfully so, because that was totally a ridiculous thing to even talk about. But I was expecting members of the trade union stand up to racism lot to turn up there, and there'll be like a whole like us versus them counter demos sort of nonsense. None of that happened. I think in some ways the government was allowing a bit of they were allowing a bit of anger. There was like this sort of like, we'll release the pressure, bearing in mind the allowing Farage as well to give his look back with white rage, with complete rage, as earlier in the day as well. So there seems to be a lot of things that have been permitted to go on. So I'll just read a bit from Millennial Woes here, because this gives people an idea what happened. So on the 3rd of December 25, the first term was nearing the end, and to celebrate, one of his teams gathered. Henry was a university there, and they gathered at the Hobbit pub. At 11:07 p.m., Henry Nowak left the Hobbit and began making his way home to his halls of residence, most likely Portswood House, which is at the top of Belmont Road, a quiet residential street lined with big houses on both sides. He was slightly drunk and from his merrymaking, but within the legal limit for driving. Stumbling back to the halls at night, it is something that virtually every male student in Britain has done throughout the ages, but Novak was in modern Britain. Vikram Singh Digwa, a 22-year-old Sikh, lived nearby in his family house on St. Denis Road. Oddly enough, he also worked in accountancy, being accepted by a local firm. However, his own community were wary of him. They had barred him from the temple for bad behavior. Fulfilling religious requirements, he wore a small kirpan dagger around his neck. Um, this whole thing has been the point of contention as well, debate whether that should be banned. Um, Bearing in mind, after Dunblane, certain like handguns and weapons were banned, and it seems that uh, the reason for religious practices does it trump public safety? That's something we hear all the time, but the Sikhs seem to have the privilege that others don't when it comes to that. So, but he is in a Sikh order called the Nihang, for whom carrying a second weapon is customary. So he also has an 8-inch Pesh Kaps sword hanging sheathed from his waist. Aside from any religious obligations, he was obsessed with the bladed weapons and had trained with them since the age of 12. On the night Digwear had just come excuse me. Digwear had just come home from a Deliveroo shift. One report says he parked his car on Belmont Road at 11:17 p.m. It seems he walked some way towards his family house, then went back to fetch some curry chips from his car. The two men encountered each other on the pavement at number 70. Novak was about 3/4 of the way home. He happened to be filming a video for Snapchat at the time. In this footage, he can be heard saying, "Hello, car," and singing to himself before yawning. This suggests to me he was slightly drunk and tired, in a placid and light-hearted mood. He paused filming as soon as his interaction with Digwear began, so we don't know exactly how that happened. Digwear claims that Novak deliberately bumped into him and told him he could have moved a little more, then said, "Do you think you're a bad man? I'm from Essex. You don't know what people from Essex are on." In modern British slang, bad man means gangster, someone who's controversial for using violence or something like a roadman, all that sort of nonsense. Novak resumed filming. The footage shows Digwear walking away and Novak saying, "In it, bad man. What bad man? You're a bad man." Says, "You're a bad man. Go on." Digwear replied, "I'm a bad man," then walked back to Novak and grabbed his phone, which point the footage ends. In court, Digwear said he grabbed Novak's phone in response to being filmed and that Novak now got very aggressive, punching him, knocking off his turban and saying, "I'm going to fuck you up. I'm going to kill you." Digwear testified that he did not mean to stab Novak in the chest when he pushed him away. This is where Digwear's story, plausible enough until now, falls apart. How can you accidentally unsheath a sword? Bearing in mind, this is like sheath, so it has like leather strapping and everything. So, and the reason sheaths are designed like that, as people will tell you, even like the medieval ones of medieval Europe, is so you don't accidentally, it doesn't accidentally fall out, and you don't accidentally stab yourself. even with a smaller, like a sax or anything, is even back to the time, Anglo-Saxon time, it would be designed so you don't accidentally stab yourself. How can you accidentally unsheathe the sword and stab someone in the chest with it? It also seems unlikely that an intelligent and ambitious young man like Nowak, versed in the PC ways of modern Britain, would resume filming if he intended to racially abuse a non-white person. Which is true. I mean, even if you're drunk, and I will say, I don't know about Henry. I think I don't know if he was political, was his family political. I think he just was a normal lad, and it, they had a bit of an argument. But even in his drunk state, when he was arguing, he wasn't abusive. He didn't even really swear with them as well. So it would seem like a bit of a escalation, you know, in that way. What's more, in both Snapchat segments, Novak's tone is described as a placid and light-hearted, not aggressive or threatening. With that in mind, a pretty different interpretation based on the same footage as possible. Well, the point is he was drunk as well, so he, he was obviously partly drunk anyway, and that probably not completely aware, not completely aware. But even drunk, sometimes drunk people get aggressive. The footage that I've seen, and the descriptions that I've seen from court documents on that, is that he didn't really raise his voice. He wasn't aggressive or threatening. He just sounded drunk. He was walking along Belmont Road, hazily filming a Snapchat video, and then bumped into someone. He paused filming so as to apologize. Then, bemused by the sight of a turban-wearing man with the sheathed sword hanging from his waist, he thought his Snapchat friends might like to see him resume filming. Slightly drunk, he engaged the stranger in banter, thinking he would enjoy it and play along. In it, bad man, what a bad man, and all that sort of stuff. Either way, the footage shows that Digweed did not respond well to this. I believe that while Novak was being jovial, Digweed was being serious and feeling increasingly malevolent, calling like a spring preparing to strike. He replied to Novak, I'm a bad man, and then approached him, snatched his phone, ended filming. Perhaps while a confused Novak was demanding his phone back, Digweed drew his sword. He inflicted 3 wounds and slashed Novak's jaw, a stab to his groin area, and then stabbed to his chest. The blade punctured Novak's lung and cut a major vein, slowly causing massive internal bleeding. Bizarrely, Digweed, now at 11:22 p.m., began recording with his own phone. That footage shows Novak attempting to escape, climbing on top of a bin to jump over a fence, leaving a trail of blood behind, while Digweed taunts him, "You're not going to get away with this, big man," and stabs him twice in the back of his legs. Novak managed to jump over the fence to number 68, landing on a car. I guess Digweed walked around to join him there. At this point, Novak seemed to have been overcome by his injuries and stopped fleeing. Digweed, now assured of his quarry, stopped pursuing. 2 young men now began a sort of a captor/prisoner conversation, and this is where Novak pleaded with Digweed for help. Digweed mocked him, and Digweed even took up photos of Novak while he was bleeding out on the ground. Apparently, even the photos that he took was of the slashes of on Novak, so the actual sword slashes, which he had this obsession with Footage from a home security camera has Nowak saying, "I'm dying," and Digger replying, "You're not dying, bro." And then a full 10 minutes later, Novak's saying, "You stabbed me," and Digger replying, "No, I didn't." Digger was lying to his victim, as will later become clear. He knew he had stabbed him at least 3 times. Digger denied he had punished. Having denied he had punished him, Digger now explained why he had punished him. "You're recording me, thinking you're sick." Um, so sick in the context for people, that means like cool or tough, cool, tough, daring, that sort of thing. That's like a sort of urban youth sort of slang phrase. Anyway, a woman resident heard their voices outside and called the police, saying she thought someone had been stabbed. Incredibly, it seems that nothing came of this call. So that's one thing that isn't talked about, is that somebody did call, a third party called, and nothing happened. During that 10-minute period, Digwood not call didn't call for an ambulance for Nowak. However, he did film him for a full 5 minutes. I presume this um, was a separate recording from the earlier one with the stabbing of the legs. Um, that video was withheld from trial anyway, for being too disturbing. And I doubt that will be released, because that probably would trigger all sorts of things. So Digweed's brother, Guprit, 26 at the time, and himself had previously had form for threatening people in public with the sword. The brother concocts the story. Digger was a victim of a racist abuse and assault by Nowak. Given later comments made between them in a police van, it is possible that at this point Guprit generally didn't know what had happened and was simply taking his brother's word for everything. Though regardless, um, uh, that hasn't really. He's facing investigation of that, so I'll leave that aside for a minute. Whether or not Nowak knocked off Digweed's turban and brother agreed, we can't really tell, and that's going to be up to the investigation going forward for his brother. Highly unlikely his turban had been knocked off. Either way, by the time the police arrived, his hair was loose and hanging down over his face, which the prosecutor suggested he did so as to corroborate the story. Guprit now called 999 and relayed the fake story to the police. In that, he says, "We've just got attacked racially by some white person. He physically attacked my brother. We're Sikhs. We wear a turban, and he just attacked my brother. We're restraining him right now because he just attacked my brother and took my brother's turban off. He also um, he's verbally attacked my brother racially. I'm not having this as a regular occurrence. I live here. I'm not having this as a regular occurrence. He ain't fighting people. He's racially attacking people. That's what he's done. Now he sees some brown people. That's what it was." So Guprit also denied at the time that any weapons had been used. As a result, the police were unaware of any medical emergency and therefore did not summon an ambulance. Either now or before, Guprit called 999. He then also called his parents, his father, Moga, and mother, Kiran Kaur. They now arrived. Digwa and his mother conspired in Punjabi, and she took the sword and left the scene. And Guprit, for some reason, filmed this little conspiracy there on his phone, which probably helped his mother get prosecuted. But the sword was later found at their house among a huge collection of bladed weaponry that Digwa had been amassing over the years. They waited then for the police to arrive. During this time, Digwa actively prevented Nowak from seeking medical help. They were holding him down, restraining him. Guprit had told the police operator, "I can't let him go until this gets sorted." The family seemed to have been determined that this white racist wouldn't get away with the abusing young Vikram, but if they hadn't restrained him, Novak could have rung on people's doorsteps for help, or got to the main road and been seen by passing motorists. In fact, if Digwer had simply given him back his phone, Novak could have called for an ambulance himself, because he was still somewhat conscious at this time. By now it must have been at least 10 minutes since he had received the fatal blow. There was a trail of blood and from his escape attempt, and given his various wounds, there was also certainly blood spilt elsewhere by now, and the slash to his jaw would have been clearly visible. We can't tell on the body cam footage that's gone round because it's the faces have been blurred out. Quite a few faces have been blurred out. Given that he had been telling Digwer, "I'm dying," even before the family arrived, he would have certainly been saying the same in front of them now, yet none of the four Sikhs thought to call an ambulance for him. Instead, they spent this time accusing him of racism. Nowak denied that and insisted he had been stabbed. Digwer replied, "No one stabbed you, bro. You're drunk." The truth, Nowak was below the drinking. He was below the drink drive limit, and Digwer himself was the person who had struck him with a sword 5 times. Furthermore, Father Moga joined in accusing Nowak of pretending to be injured. What a bastard family! Just what an awful bastard family! Just an awful set of people. I mean, there's no words I can use in this country that will not get me arrested for that. Absolute fucking scumbags. I swear to God. I mean, I know I jokingly say like, we're going to be worshipping General Dyer, but like Jesus Christ, I mean it's you know yeah. Anyway, the police arrived at 11:37. By now, Kiran had returned to the scene, and so this is mother and father of the killer had returned to the scene and was propping Novak up, perhaps because it would look better than with his sons pinning him on the ground. The father explained to the police he had seen he keeps dropping down, so I'm just trying to keep him up. Why would he? And then as Woes points out, why would he keep dropping down if he wasn't injured? This question didn't seem to occur to either the father or the police. Father then quickly said that Nowak had a mouthful of blood, which aroused no interest from the police, even though it clearly indicates a serious internal injury. Instead, they took the Digwer's word for it that he hurt himself when jumping over the fence. Digwer himself distracted them for a while by claiming to be injured, trivial bruise under his eye, which also can be heard in the background telling another officer that this kind of thing has happened before to him. It is worth noting, this is my own thing, the prosecutor points out that and I saw the bruise, and people who know about bruising, a brand new bruise, like if you've been, like say you've been punched and a bruise starts to come out, it's the color of it is sometimes quite light reddish or something like that, or if you've been punched, you don't get a bruise, it will come out later. And then as you, and this applies to also someone who's brown as well, this will apply the same. A bruise will come out, and then as it gets, an old bruise will then start to turn a darker color because it's, the internal vessels which have caused a small internal bleeding, it ceases. But in that one, you see like effectively like an old bruise, like a few days, possibly. So anyway, Digwer himself distracted them for a while by claiming he'd been injured, as I mentioned, the bruise. He can also be heard in the background telling another officer that this kind of thing happened before. We've been walking the park, and multiple times we've had people race us and attack us, over and nothing happens. The Novak told the police that he'd been stabbed and couldn't breathe. Novak told them he was, Digweed told them he was pretending to be injured. Specifically said he hasn't been stabbed, and reiterated that Novak had assaulted and racially abused him. Lying on his side, Novak told the police repeatedly that he couldn't breathe and that he had been stabbed. The police officer replied, "I don't think you have, mate," which has again been, um, you know, uh, that phrase has really been doing the rounds over the last couple of days, and yeah, it doesn't look good for those officers. Um, Novak said, "Please, brother, I can't breathe," and this is his final words, and then lost consciousness. He was now motionless, unresponsive. Yet they proceeded to read him his rights. At this point, a female officer noticed that his pupils weren't reacting to light. This, exactly 3 minutes after the police had arrived, was when they realized he really was unwell and they had been lied to persistently by Digwa's family. The handcuffs, which had been on for nearly 2 minutes, not 1 minute, as was claimed by police chief in his apology, so it was 2 minutes, but were removed, and the police began CPR and summoned an ambulance. Digwa was arrested for attempted murder at 11:55, and he was not handcuffed. An emergency doctor was also flown in by helicopter. When these medical professionals arrived, it's unknown, but at the time it was a lot later than had the Digwa family been honest. However, no matter how soon they arrived, Novak was doomed. The sword passed upwards through soft tissue between the two uppermost ribs, capturing the lung, cutting important vein behind the collarbone. Access to the vein would it's like a main artery, right? Um, he would not have survived. And Henry was then pronounced dead at the scene at just after 12 in the morning on the 4th of December, about 80 minutes after he encountered Vikram. Within 4 days, Hampshire police had taken action against the entire Digweed family, and he's been arrested. And I'll leave that there. You can check out the rest of the bit, but that was what happened at the scene, and the anger from that. There's really, the family have largely been arrested and charged or facing further charges. The mother and the father should be that they weren't born in this country. They should be deported. They've been imprisoned and then deported. Um, and the other, he's got life. He should have been given a life license. I mean, quite frankly, he should be executed for murder. I believe in the death penalty, and I think he should be executed. It's quite clearly he's mentally deficient. Whether or not who we have in this society, him and his entire lineage are just mentally deficient and should be executed. So that is they've faced it, but the main anger and usually what we saw yesterday was the response from the police, and this all stems from the McPherson report. Now, what was the McPherson report? So we have to go back to the murder of Stephen Laurence. So Stephen Laurence, so in London, in 1993, he was murdered by what's described as a white gang in a racially motivated attack while he was waiting for a bus. This Afro-Caribbean teenager and the response was that the police didn't respond correctly when it came to providing aid, and also the investigation, um, and any sort of follow up. And there was a lot of criticism down to this, and this narrative formed that actually this was instead of an incompetence by police officers or total indifference. This was sort of a malicious, racist policy, institutional racist policy by the Metropolitan Police, and this resulted in a like incredible levels of resources into this. One of the problems is though is like the I believe the identified perpetrators. Nobody really knew who the person was who struck the blow, who murdered Stephen Lawrence, and even because of and this is a time, remember, before CCTV, people with phone cameras and all that sort of stuff. So um, there was also a question of evidence. There wasn't really much evidence, but and so during the trial there was a not guilty, which we have in this system. If there's no evidence of a crime, and then you know that's what the jury instructed do. They look at the evidence, but this was then viewed as more of a social crime and a social injustice. And this is where you have like your Diane Abbotts and your Lammies and the Afro-Caribbean community, and then the identity rights groups that come into this, who have played and constantly play an important role in getting their own side off effectively, making sure that they are not punished or have the sort of the full weight of policing come down on them. This also culminated in a change of tactics in policing, and this came about through the McPherson report. So I'll just bring up if I just bring up the McPherson report a sec. Um, so the McPherson report, which was published in February 9th, was a public inquiry into handling of the murder, and it was led by Sir William McPherson, and it uncovered systematic police failures, declaring the Metropolitan Police institutionally racist, and issued 70 extensive recommendations. So in the findings, they found that there was institutional racism. Report coined and defined this term in police context, describing it as a collective failure of organisation to provide appropriate service to people because of their colour, culture, or ethnic origin. It cited unwitting prejudice. So, if you remember back during the days of the good old woke, you had microaggressions, right? Somebody looked at me funny, and this is racism. This is where this bullshit comes from. They basically is saying um, this their behavior, mannerisms is what we would define. This is how bullshit the report is. And then also they cited the investigation failure. In its harsh criticism, the Metropolitan Police initial investigation of incompetence or lack of direction and the mishandling of key witnesses with the case. Now, up till this point in the 80s and the 90s, you had this reformation within the Metropolitan Police because you had bent coppers and a lot of bent coppers, right? One thing the Metropolitan Police has and still has to this day, along with many other police forces, is unfortunately that there are just a lot of incompetent. I mean, it's not even malicious. It's just that they're just complete thick and incompetent people who shouldn't be in the posts. And there was you had promotions of people who weren't fit for the job, sure, and it definitely goes on today. But that was seen as that was applied on a racial line. The report triggered a massive overhaul of UK policing, race relations, legislation, how the police service record investigating racist incidents. Now that's the key bit here. So the recommendations, one of it was the double jeopardy. Though one of the long-standing things is you couldn't, if you were arrested, if you were arrested, charged, and then went to trial for a crime and found innocent in court, the police couldn't charge you again for that same crime. That's the double jeopardy, right? So the report recommended abolishing the long-standing double jeopardy rule, which previously prevented individuals from being tried twice for the same crime. There you go. And this was implemented. So in 2012, convictions of the ones that were found innocent before, I mean, in 2012 they could then be the killer. They be found guilty in 2012. So police accountability and diversity. It demanded broader representation of minority ethnic communities within the police force and the implementation of independent oversight panels. Now, broader representation. So that's where you have your quotas. That's where you have these panels. And if you're not aware, policing, let's take my local one of Avon, Somerset. Every now and then, whenever there's an interaction, there was a good documentary. I saw a clip go around a few years ago now. There was an arrest of this black lady on a bus in Bristol, and she was basically just like proper like spazzing out, kicking off, shouting at members of the public and everything. And they tried to get her off the bus because she was being disruptive, and I think she physically assaulted a couple people. And there were people with children on there. There was a woman with a baby. I think she had a child with her as well. So it was kind of like a tense situation. And she ended up assaulting the officers. And what happened was the officer, after being assaulted, they used force to bring her down on the ground and dragged her out the bus. And they even had to use a taser on her just so they could get handcuffs on and get her in the back of a police van because she was being so violent. Now, this was taken to a panel where you had representatives and leaders of the local Afro-Caribbean community. So this included church figures. This included charity group leaders. This included various activists in the local left-wing organizations in the city, and even, I think, a couple councillors. So, and they had full access to the tapes, to the recording, and to all aspects. And as you can imagine, the obvious criminal did nothing wrong from their own community, and the police, the white officers, were being somewhat, pseudo cryptically racist, and because they wouldn't allow this psycho black woman to chimp out on the bus and attack people. No joke, that's what happened. They were forced to, while it's not binding, it's in any decision for policing and also the internal policing. These officers, they go through an investigation, but nothing happened to them. But they have like this implemented as a way of making sure the community have their say in this. And this is what you have with in this country. It's the same with if you're black, Muslim, Hindu, Sikh, the Jewish population in this country. Every minority group has this right. And this is the legacy of the Macpherson report, where you have these oversight and these diversity inclusion. Another thing I will say as well is, as a result of quotas, you had, and this has been documented in the grooming gang cases, instances where a number of officers from that community would join up with the local police forces or work in tangent with these police forces in similar roles that I mentioned before, and this would prevent this would help them build up a network, a rather secretive network of child rape and sex trafficking. This, of course, would also be helpfully facilitated by the local Labour Party, who, knowing, I mean, I'd say it was kind of, it wasn't even secret. I mean, let me correct it. It was an open secret because people knew about it, but they chose to ignore it because, um, you know, I know people say suicidal empathy. I don't like this. I don't think it actually explains like the sort of nature of it. It's kind of like this moral sickness. It's like this social and moral sickness, and it's the same social moral sickness I saw with some Russians who were engaging in some of, like, the collapse of the Soviet Union and engage in prostitution and pornography. It's kind of like this collective, like this. I mean, I might want to call it like Caligula syndrome. Maybe I could call it like just total chaos, total deprave and evil behavior. That's kind of what we got from this. And this has been set up as like the backbone of policing to this day. And unfortunately, the legacy of that McPherson report is largely why the events of December last year happened in the way it did, because of the style of policing. And bearing in mind that we'll talk about the recruitment of policing. This is what um, policing is. This is like the culture of this is you talk institutionalized racism. There's now institutionalized white racism in every police force up and down the country, and it's largely enforced by white officers. Is kind of like the most mental thing is it's kind of enforced because any accusation of racism on their part, they lose their careers. Ultimately, that's why it's all done like this. So when they got there, um, what the public have seen and what many people around the world have seen now is that legacy of the McPherson report. And there have been many laws which have been passed by Labour, New Labour, the Tory party, and so you've got like these diversity in senior policing ranks. Um, there's and also the changing in recruitment process. So you need like a degree. So what you have is you have like this and this is where you see the decline in policing, where you had people from salt to the earth communities, people from the army, people from um, you know I gotta say the more practical side of the world of society, entering the police service and having this, I guess you could say, the sort of actual belief in justice. And now you've got these university educated type of officers whose um, reality of the world is social justice, who only get promoted through diversity and equality, and probably have a greater understanding of cultural Marxism, and all the other anti-colonialism, Marxism, and all the other things that come with it, diversity, inclusion, and well, the other structural racism, that's sort of what makes up in one police officer, and that's why, and it's not even that. It's why you have like so much public distrust in policing now, is because the quality of police officers now are just uh, shameful. I mean, every other month you'll see like a video of a police interaction with somebody, and they're just fucking clueless, or some sort of clownish thing that they end up involved with. Or like when you have, I mean, the most obvious thing for us in our circles is the police turn up to your house and they'll be like, check your thinking, all that. That's kind of like your free speech unions stuff. But even things like that, um, you have people, and then it's like lanyard class. It's like these women with like these really, really ugly and detestable women with their lanyards, and they're in the police force. And then you have like these totally, um, you know, mutant featured, disproportionate, men as well, who, you know, that there's also a big part of it is they all seek a power trip in the current system. The current system gives them the type of power, and so this is like for them a power trip. And there's a reason why. If you look at the revolutions in Europe, the Bolshevik, the even like the revolutions against the Warsaw Pact countries and um, Arab Spring, it's always the police that get the effectively taken out by the mob. And the army are the ones who are considered the heroes protecting against the police, because the police hold the system, the regime. That's the sort of nature of the police now in our society, that they've just become this total regime stooges. So that's where we are. Um, I think I've said this for a long time. When you look at, and just as I mentioned, these committees and all that, it really should now just we're so far beyond all the stupidity with Tommy Robinson and all the drama and like his Sikh best friend. We're beyond all that now. The problem in this country is effectively we are governed by and for exclusively minority interests, and that is a problem. That is a problem. It's a problem, like today. I saw in the comments they were debating it. Farage got himself, heckled by most of the chamber for his comments and all that. But then you had a Tory party MP who said about the Jewish community in London, and the response from that was, well, yes, we give like £30 million extra in defence, in policing and security for them. And then it's like think about the Sikh community and all the racism that they're going to get from this. And all that shit is what's driving public anger now, and it's got to stop. Effectively, we need um, our own representatives. For a long time now, we haven't had our own representatives. We've had to be beholden to foreign nationals with their foreign interests for far too long. And I think this, not mentioning the case in question directly, because I know the family don't want it to be directly politicized, but what I will say is there will be more of this. There will be more killings, because effectively it's it when you have a culture, there is I said there was a culture of anti-white racism. When you listen to the voices of those officers dealing with Novak on the ground bleeding out and dying in handcuffs, that same cold, callous, indifferent dehumanization, this subhuman thing, which we were all taught about. This is how the Nazis treated the Jews and all that sort of stuff. That is the same mentality that went on, which allowed the mass scale rapes. And remember, of girls in grooming gangs. And bearing in mind, that was covered up by our own native population, by many in our own native population. It wasn't from Pakistani communities. I mean, it was them perpetrators, and they had hand, but a lot of it from the top level was our own people, and that is a problem. And that's something we need to find out collectively on the right. Like, why is this a thing? Why does this exist? I don't believe, like, even diversity training itself. I mean, you can't be that level indoctrinated. That isn't normal. And that's something we need to find out, of why is that the case, and stamp it out. And I hope people, whether it's Reform or Restore or whoever, people watching this from that, they need to be raising this in meetings, um, with branch, with members, and start. Really, what I'm saying here is that there's actually a deep-rooted psychological evil, which within our society, within our own people, which, you know, it's not even about political, like, you want to be like lovey-dovey liberal, kumbaya. The kumbaya phrase has gone, and your kumbaya drum circle has gone into rape and murder and killing, and just trying to justify it. That's kind of insane. That we're sort of beyond that point now. And it's also becoming to the level of, you just want to end our civilization, you just want to end society. That's not a political debating point. That's not a debating point. That's not a negotiating point. That's insanity. That's not a debate. It's not a point for a debate. So I'll leave you on that, guys. Thank you for tuning in, and this should be going live out on Thursday. Until then, I'll see you all next time.